Hi, it's Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. And this is Tristan, who's a Corgi, and this is episode 89 or 90 of Conversations with a Corgi. And we were outside this morning, and then it started to rain, and then it started to rain harder. And so we have moved indoors, which is a sad thing when we're talking about flower essences. However, I don't know if you can see here, if you zoom in, this is my wildflower meadow at my house. It is primarily daisies right now and black-eyed Susans. So it's yellow and white, and it's starting to turn into purple and white, which will be the echinacea, the coneflower, and also we'll be having a lot of purple bee balm come out in the next couple of weeks. Sorry we can't be in the other garden this morning because there's some beautiful hydrangeas blooming, but we are going to talk today appropriately about many of the plants that are related to the sunflower. And clearly on a day like this when it's raining so hard, we miss the sun because it is the summer. So today's flower essence from Botanical Animal that we'll be talking about is called CRISEASE, to ease a crisis. And it says it's for situations of stress, shock, and trauma. And I have used this one quite a bit actually. CRISEASE is to the rescue. When your animals experience any sort of accident or traumatic event, the emotional scars can be difficult for them to get past. Use whenever there is a shocking situation that overfaces your animal, leaving them panicked, shaky, or off balance. Great for emergencies as well as pre- and post-surgical situations. Helps resolve the crisis. Brings a greater sense of peacefulness. And you'll see that many of the flower essences that are in CRISEASE are a lot of the same ones that are in Mellow Out. And in fact, in CRISEASE we have arnica, cherry plum, clematis, impatiens, long branch frostweed, and Star of Bethlehem. So there aren't tremendous numbers of flower essences in this blend, but just enough to really make a difference for you and your pet when you are facing a time of crisis. I have recommended this when an animal is undergoing chemotherapy or is facing a life-threatening disease of many kinds, and it has also been useful after a dog has been severely attacked by another dog or hit by a car. It's really good in any time of great crisis, especially one where there's a life or death decision going on for your dog. So the first thing we're going to talk about that is in CRISEASE is cherry plum. And cherry plum, as we talked about before when we were discussing Mellow Out, cherry plum is for a fear of mental stress. That means the fear of being emotionally overwhelmed, which things are going bad. For instance, in a dog getting chemotherapy, you go the first time and it's pretty terrible, but you recover. The second time you go, there's a lot of anxiety. You're back in the same place. You remember how bad you felt the first time. So that fear of emotional stress is what the cherry plum will help with. It's for decreasing a sense of dread and decreasing a sense of loss of control. So again, if the dog is facing a life-threatening illness, there is a loss of control, a loss of bodily function. For my dogs with DM, degenerative myelopathy, it's like ALS in humans. It's a gradual paralysis starting in the back legs and working its way forward. And gradually your dog loses control of one organ system after the next, and to the point where they can't control their bladder. Sometimes they can't control their bowel. And so that lack of control is something that the cherry plum would address. And that fear of losing even more control. I know there's skeeters because of the rain. It's for an obsessive fear, especially of suicide. So again, that fear of death, that life and death decision is what the cherry plum in CRISEASE will help address for your dog. Particularly for those with staring eyes, agitation, loss of reason, and a fear of doing a dreaded task. And we talked before about the staring eyes being a sign of the sympathetic nervous system, the stress system being overwhelmed, and your dog is at that point of fear, flight, or faint, or freeze. And freeze is when we see the staring eyes. So that really is a sign that your dog is tremendously overwhelmed. It's for increasing confidence in an animal facing these situations. So it's a really good one, cherry plum, to be in a remedy called CRISEASE. The next one that's in it, also in Mellow Out, is Impatience. And we know them as the pleasant annuals we put in our yards every year that are pink and purple and white. And they bring a bit of sunshine into our lives, and they grow well in a shady area. So just like that, in their beautiful flower external use in our world, the flower essence of impatience brings light to a place where there's darkness. So same thing, facing a life and death decision, severe trauma, severe crisis, you need that shining beauty of the impatience flower to bring you out of that. And so it's also been called jewelweed and rose balsam. And it was typically used for poison ivy rash. And related to that, impatience is really good for irritation, tension, and pain, and it robs disease of its power to overwhelm. So again, facing something like cancer, or my dogs with DM, or a dog with really bad case of Lyme disease, you know, some of these really life-threatening situations that your dog can be in, either from disease or trauma, the impatience will help them get control back of their life and take the power away from the disease and the sickness and the trauma in their body. Impatience is also been used to induce vomiting and as a diuretic, which again is clearing toxins from the body. So again, it's a great thing to have when you're in a crisis, to get the things you don't need out of your system so that you can move on and embrace the beautiful things in the world. They've used impatience. Some of the properties of impatience have been used to treat breast cancer and testicular cancer. So again, it's got that hormonal balance, which when you are in a state of sympathetic stress, you are out of hormonal balance. So the impatience flower essence will help address that. And it's been used for joint pain, and it's a cooling flower. And remember, we talked about it being mucilaginous, gummy, so that you can put it on poison ivy and it will stick to it and draw the inflammation out of the poison ivy. So it's also been good for burns and scalds and, you know, general states of over-inflammation, overheat. And again, when you're in a crisis, you are in a state of overheat, even if you are, if you have a systemic disease. So the next component of crises is arnica. Arnica, as we all know, is a very powerful anti-inflammatory with analgesic properties like aspirin. And we all know about arnica as something that we take when we've had, you know, a sprained ankle or a bee sting. I take arnica for headaches, any kind of muscular spasm or strain. Arnica is a huge relief, and it's a big component in Tramiel, which is now called T-Relief, which is a homeopathic treatment for inflammation. So people have used arnica for centuries for sprains, strains, bruises, and insect bites, and it's also been used for rashes. Native Americans called it mountain tobacco, and it's also been called leopard's bane. It has orange blossoms and it grows in the mountainous regions of Europe. It is also known for its antimicrobial properties, and it's good for emotional aspects of trauma. Again, your emotional body is part of the whole system that is you. So if you are facing a crisis, that emotional component needs to be addressed, and the arnica will help with the emotional aspects of a trauma or a crisis. And if you talk to anyone who's had a life-threatening illness, they will speak to the emotional aspects of that being an important part of their healing. I've done a lot of work with a famous cancer doctor named Dr. Bernie Siegel, and part of what his wonderful success was because he acknowledged the emotional components of disease and the cognitive aspects of disease, and found that if you treated the emotional state, you could often make changes in the whole physical body as well. So having that aspect of arnica that addresses emotional trauma is really important to put in a blend called CRISEASE. Arnica also helps you increase your confidence and helps engage the your higher self, engage your higher self to nurture your distressed body. And we've talked about this before. When you are out of balance in any number of ways, you need your higher self to step in and take charge, because it's a terrible physical and emotional exhaustion for you to manage everything yourself in your physical state. So you need your higher self for guidance. And Arnica calls in your higher self to nurture your body when you're in a physical crisis. And it helps rebalance and recover from that physical crisis. And it gives you a conscious embodiment, which is something that you don't always have when you're in a crisis. You feel literally out of your body. And the Arnica brings you back into your body and back into your consciousness and relates you back to this world. Another aspect of CRISEASE is the long-stemmed frostweed. And this one is also in panic attack. So again, panic attack is useful when you're having a complete crisis of a sort, and CRISEASE is for a different kind of crisis. So it's important to note that long-stem frostweed is a component in both of these. It's also been called Indian tobacco, and in fact, this is the second of 3 things that are in this blend that have been used as tobacco. The third is clematis, and I think it's in Beatrice Potter, where one of the rabbits smokes clematis stems as a pipe after a long day. It might be in The Wind in the Willows, I'm not sure, but it's been called rabbit tobacco. Anyway, the long-stem frostweed is Indian tobacco. It has white flowers and a white crown and a beard. It's also been called ice plant and wing stem, because remember when we talked about it before, it has these little bulges on the stems, and when it rains, the dew and the raindrops collect in those little bulges. And it's an interesting thing about this plant. It helps it store water. And it's wild in the U.S. Southwest, and again, it's related to the sunflower, like some of the other ones in this blend for CRISEASE. It's been used as a GI aid and a laxative for eye treatment, for joint pain, and also in ceremony. It's an important nectar provider. The long-stem frostweed is important for pollinators such as bees and butterflies in our gardens. And if it grew in this area very well, I would certainly have it in this garden, because this garden was planted specifically to attract pollinators. There's hummingbirds, dragonflies, butterflies, and bumblebees out there all the time. And if we could get closer and it wasn't raining so hard, I could show you the beauty of that garden. Anyway, it's been used for especially for butterflies. Frostweed has attracted them. And frostweed has been associated with relieving terror, fright, panic, coping in an emergency, and turning fear into courage. So of course, if you're facing a life-threatening illness or you've been hit by a car, you want to turn that fear into courage, because you need courage to get through the trauma of the situation, which is what CRISEASE is for. And long-stem frostweed is an important component in rescue remedy. And as I've said before, when I'm done talking about the botanical animal flower essences, we will look at rescue remedy, how to use it properly, and what are the components of rescue remedy. Another component in CRISEASE is the Star of Bethlehem, which we've also seen in Angel of Mercy. And Star of Bethlehem, as you can imagine from the name, is to bring comfort to those who are in distress, and for delayed shock or to neutralize effects of past or present shock. So of course you want that in CRISEASE, because you have a past shock perhaps being brought up by the present shock. When I worked in New York City after 9/11 with people who had experienced trauma during those events, we were doing craniosacral therapy with those people, volunteering with CORGI, who ended up volunteering in another aspect. But we found many people did not talk about what happened on 9/11. They talked about the recent death of a loved one, a miscarriage, another trauma in their life, but they could not talk about the current trauma because it was too painful. So they processed the emotions of the current trauma by discussing and reliving the past trauma when we were working with them. So the Star of Bethlehem flower essence is really interesting in that regard, because it helps you neutralize the effects of past or present shock. So if your dog has been hit by a car or he's facing a life-threatening illness, you're going to possibly resurface some past trauma. And for a dog that's been rescued, you don't know what their life is like before. And so you may see layers of overwhelming shock going on, not just from the current circumstance. And so Star of Bethlehem, because of those elements, is related to treating PTSD as well. It quickly restores the body's self-healing mechanism. If you are undergoing chemotherapy, you need your body's self-healing mechanisms to engage quickly and completely, because you have so much going on, and really they are poisoning your body to kill the cancer cells. So your body needs to take over and use its wisdom to heal all the other cells in the body from chemotherapy. So crises would be something you'd use for chemotherapy. And that pain can be physical, intellectual, or an emotional event. It can be a big or small thing, and it causes a shock to stay in the system and create an imbalance, which again gets back to that idea of being in the sympathetic nervous system response of stress and out of balance with the parasympathetic or peace systems of the body. So Star of Bethlehem will help bring that back into balance so that your body can work forward in a situation where it's not undergoing current stress. Being in a state of stress continuously lowers your immune system, and so your body cannot cope with shock or trauma very effectively. So Star of Bethlehem will help with that. And it stays in the system for a while, and if your pet needs this, he may appear withdrawn. His eyes may be dull. He may have decreased sight and hearing, decreased sensation, because he's so stressed that he literally is out of his mind and he can't relate to his five senses. So Star of Bethlehem will again bring that parasympathetic back on board so that your dog can rebalance and regain his sense of sight, smell, hearing, etc. It is the comforter and soother of pains and sorrows. That's what Dr. Bach, the flower essence originator, said of Star of Bethlehem. Comforter of pains and sorrows. So of course we want that in something called CRISEASE. It leads you to your higher self. Again, let your higher self take control. It's like that thing they say in AA, let go and let God, but it is the same kind of idea that we have in CRISEASE. Let your spiritual self take care of what's going on with you so that you can focus your entire effort on healing yourself from the current situation. It reestablishes energetic links to dissolve energetic trauma and regain energy, vitality, mental clarity, and inner strength. So the Star of Bethlehem is a really strong flower essence for anyone facing a crisis. And of course you'd want to keep that in something called CRISEASE. The last component of CRISEASE is clematis. And I just love clematis. At my old house, I had beautiful clematis growing up the front of the house, and they are often purple flowers. They're so pretty. And I love how they climb and grow. And I had an interesting thing happen with clematis that I think speaks to as part of its properties as a flower essence. I had one growing on the fence out here, and I had a new lawnmower person who also was learning how to do weed whacking, and they nipped the base of my clematis. And so it was no longer attached to the soil. And yet that stem of flowers continued to grow for months, wrapping along the fence with new buds coming out. And it was just amazing how it survived in spite of the fact that its roots had been separated from the plant. So I think that speaks to the power of clematis to help in a situation where you really need survival, where you really need to draw on all your resources to get by no matter how bad the situation is. Clematis, like many of the flowers in this flower essence, has been associated with anti-inflammatory properties. It's cytotoxic and antimicrobial. And of course, as we all know, it's a climbing perennial, and it has over 355 species. It's a very broad-reaching flower on this continent and in Europe. It's in the buttercup family. So I'm wearing my yellow flowers today. And the buttercup, when you think about it, no one can think of a buttercup and not find a smile and some childhood memory of holding a buttercup under your chin to see if you like butter. Well, everyone loves butter. So the clematis speaks to this property of, you know, looking at the good memories of your past as opposed to focusing on the trauma that's going on right now. Its origins of clematis are in the USA, and Native Americans used it, like some of the other flowers in crises, for skin irritation, as well as for treating tumors and cancers. Clematis montana is used in Chinese herbal medicine, and it's called mu tong, and in that case it's used to decrease fever and increase urination and increase lactation. The seed mass of clematis has been used for smoking, and as I said, I believe it was one of the Papa Rabbits in Beatrice Potter who was smoking clematis stems with his evening meal. And in fact, I have a friend who's an herbalist who does smoke the stems of clematis. I don't know what that imparts to you, but they have many properties that are beneficial. So perhaps she's smart to do that. Bach described its use for those who are drowsy, dreamy, not fully awake, and have lost interest in life. So think about that. If you're in a crisis, you may be facing life or death decisions, and you may have already given up because your body is in such great distress. Again, very important in a case where an animal's been hit by a car or severely attacked or has had some other traumatic event occur. I think there was a deer that just hopped by back there. Tristan saw it. For those who have lost interest in life, if you're unhappy in your current circumstance or living in the future and not in the present, or in hopes of happier times. So you're really living in the future and not dealing with your current circumstance. And again, that's a bit of a way of being in an out-of-body experience. When you are thinking of the future, you might be looking to death, you might be looking to a happier time, but that's taking your focus and your energy away from healing in the moment. And of course, that's a coping mechanism many of us engage when we are in a time of crisis, to look ahead, to look past it. But in fact, that may not be the most important thing you need to do when you need to heal. So the clematis will bring you back into your present circumstances and your current body. For those with severe illness, especially facing death, they will often be thinking of a reunion with a past loved one or a departed loved one. And sometimes that can keep you out of your body. And the clematis will let you go back into your body and find union with your body so that you can finish your business here on earth before you move on. And that's an important thing. If an animal is in such great crisis that they are passing on, you need to have them be present in the current moment so that they can finish their business here and move on more peacefully across the Rainbow Bridge. Clematis can bring stability, and it can bring you literally down to earth so that you can complete your business. It's for listlessness, apathy, and thinking of a lost loved one. And you can appear lost in your dreams when you're laying on the floor there having, some kind of terrible crisis. But you may look fully awake and happy even though you are lost in your dreams. And so it's important to know that if your dog looks okay but not really here in some way, the clematis in crises is going to help bring him back into his body so that he can experience fully the moment that he's living in. Often clematis is used for those who look gentle and quiet but have also lost the experience of joy in their life. And so it's really important to include clematis in something called CRISEASE, because when you're in a crisis, you forget about joy. And I know myself, when I was undergoing chemotherapy, one of the things I love to do, I love to dance at this place in Provincetown when I'm away. And it's just so happy and full of energy, and dance music is always positive. And so I had little videos on my phone of dancing and the wonderful energy of the people in this place. And that would bring a smile to my face and joy to my life and help keep me in my body so that I could recover from chemotherapy and having cancer and surgery and radiation. So I've used CRISEASE, which again is a botanical animal flower essence. Here it is in a green bottle. Because I have a lot of work in hospice with animals that are crossing the Rainbow Bridge. And I have found CRISEASE to be really helpful for animals with cancer. And as I've mentioned before, I had a little dog recently who came to me who really fit that description of needing clematis. He wasn't fully present. He seemed content and sweet, but not really there. He had the staring eyes, just not really in his body. He was undergoing, I think, his second or third chemotherapy treatment for an autoimmune disease which is not even what you really would want to use chemotherapy for as a primary course of treatment, but it was sort of a last attempt to try to help him. His kidney and liver function was poor, and he was a tiny little guy, and he had been on a poor diet prior, and so he really just had lost like his life force. And so CRISEASE was exactly what he needed to come back into his body. And in fact, in his final weeks with his person, he was able to finish up a lot of business here on earth that led to her deeper understanding of his presence in her life and his need to pass on. And also, she had specific important points about him uniting with her grandmother over the Rainbow Bridge, and him being sent here by her grandmother to be her guardian in this lifetime. And so really the spiritual component of crises is really important and can't be underestimated, because anytime you are in a great crisis, like the people after 9/11, or someone undergoing chemotherapy, or this little dog undergoing chemotherapy, or dogs like mine who have DM and they're losing their bodily function one at a time, that is a state of extreme crisis. Someone has been hit by a car, and you really are trying to make a choice whether you want to be on this plane or another plane, and you really do need to stay on this plane to finish up your business here before you can move on. I worked with a horse in hospice for over a week who spent that time processing really significant issues around his role as a racehorse and his lifetime with his person who had had him since he was 3 till when he was 33. And it was a really important time in his life spiritually, emotionally. It really helped him process some things, and what he told us during that time really made a difference in the lives of some other horses and people. So it's very important that an animal be given the opportunity to finish up their business on earth before they move on. And this is not to say that you can't put your animal down if you need to, but CRISEASE would be the flower essence you'd want to use in the time leading up to that choice. And again, I recommend that you use it if you've lost an animal over the Rainbow Bridge. It's often been seen that people and animals have the same kinds of issues going on, and so it's often the same flower essence will benefit the guardian and the animal. So the person that had the little dog that passed away after his several chemotherapy treatments for an autoimmune disorder, I recommended to her that she use CRISEASE herself. And in fact, all of the properties of the flower essences that are in CRISEASE benefited her tremendously and allowed her to be present on the earth plane and use the information from her higher self and from her ancestors and from the wisdom of the universe to see that what she needs to do is help others deal with the situation she had gone through. And so she is now on a spiritual quest to gain insight and wisdom that she would not have been able to do if she did not stay in her body and stay present in this lifetime. And so often when we lose a pet, we just really want to give up. I know when I lost Comet, it was one of the hardest things I've had to do in my life, because I just loved him so much and he had done so much to help me in his lifetime. And so I was catatonic for days, and CRISEASE would have been a good flower essence for me during that time. But I was so depressed, I didn't even, often when you're sick and it's yourself, you don't always know what to do to help yourself. You need someone else to tell you, take this. So I eventually recovered, in part because Comet came back and barked at me each evening, and so I knew that he was still with me, and I had a tangible reminder of that with Tristan also noticing that Comet was barking at us. And so we were able to move on. But CRISEASE can be an important flower essence for you as well as your pet in a time of a pet crossing the Rainbow Bridge. So this has been a discussion of the flower essence CRISEASE from Botanical Animal. And it's rained a lot harder, and now the sun's coming out here in Massachusetts. So I'm glad we did this from the side door of my house. I'm sorry you can't see the flower meadow better, but we will be back for another episode of Conversations with a Corgi on Thursday and Friday this week, where we will continue our look at botanical animal flower essences. And again, today we have talked about CRISEASE, which is for situations of stress, shock, and trauma. And in more detail, it's to the rescue when your animals experience any sort of accident or traumatic event. The emotional scars can be difficult for them to get past. Use whenever there is a shocking situation that overfaces your animal, leaving him panicky, shaky, and off balance. And again, that's off balance in the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, so that he can't modulate between peace and stress. It's great for emergencies as well as pre and post surgical situations. And again, if I had my dog going in just for a spay neuter, I would give him CRISEASE for a couple of days, up to a week before the surgery and also after the surgery. And when I did work called Emotion Code to release trapped emotions from the body with Tristan, I in fact discovered that one of the most traumatic experiences in his life was being neutered. Poor Tristan. Which is interesting because I was with him the entire time. My sister did the surgery. It went about 3.5 minutes. There was no complication of any kind. Really, I could not have predicted any smoother of a neutering situation. But for Tristan, it was really traumatic. And I later learned that, in fact, he has clear genes for DM, degenerative myelopathy, which is a problem in the Corgi breed. And though he does not meet ideal standards in many ways because he's a little fella, of course, we love him anyway. With the DM clear gene, it would have been a great thing to be able to breed him to maybe a female Corgi that does meet some of the breed standards a little better and try to breed DM clear dogs. So for him, being neutered, somehow his higher self knew that this was not a good situation. We hadn't had him tested yet for DM because it was a long time ago when he was neutered, and the test had not been developed. And so it was a sad thing for me and my sister when we discovered that he had been DM clear. And in fact, I really thought that I would be able to get more dogs like Tristan because his mother and father were actively breeding and they were young. Sadly, his mother passed away after her first or second litter after him. And so I don't know the gene state of his father. I don't know if his siblings, if they ever make more babies, will be DM clear. But in fact, that's using CRISEASE pre and post surgery can really help. And in fact, with Tristan, I did not predict that this was going to be traumatic for him at all. So even if you're going in for something like a slab fracture on a tooth or maybe a torn toenail, something like that, still use CRISEASE pre and post surgery because you just don't know in the moment what the big picture is about that surgical thing that you're having done for your pet. So think about that when you're going in for some surgery. CRISEASE helps relieve and resolve a crisis, and it brings a greater sense of peacefulness. And as I said, you can take it yourself. Just follow directions on the bottle, put it in some water. If you are experiencing a crisis with your pet, it's often important that you use CRISEASE for yourself as well. And certainly with that horse, it would have been great for his owner to also be able to be using CRISEASE. Although she is a very spiritual person and was in a very peaceful place emotionally with what was happening. And so she might not have needed it until after he passed, because there's a lot going on when you're taking care of a horse in hospice for over a week and a half. It really can be emotionally draining, and so the CRISEASE can help rebalance that emotional system. So this has been Sally Morgan and Tristan Corgi for another episode of Conversations with a Corgi, where we have today looked at the flower essence CRISEASE. And again, these are from Botanical Animal. They are available on my website. They are also available on my sister's website, and we are happy to share them with you. We always have lots of them at expos, and I am happy to be able to give you these flower essences because they have been really important in my client care and in my life. And we will be back on Thursday, depending on the weather, maybe at 8:25, to look at the next flower essence in our lineup. And I believe the next one is one that people have been looking for, which is Easy Does It. And Easy Does It is a little different from Mellow Out, and so you'll be able to see the difference between the two, and they do have some of the same flower essences in them. But I am really looking forward to talking about Easy Does It on Thursday, hopefully from the garden. So everyone, it's been, sorry I've missed you for a week while I was away, and then I got sick, and so we're back, and I am going away next week, but hopefully we'll be able to continue on a more regular basis than last week. So we will see you again on Thursday at 8:25. Have a great day. The sun's starting to come out here just in time. And please remember to look at crises as flower essence that may be able to help you when you or your pet are facing trauma, crisis, surgery, death, chemotherapy, life-threatening disease, any kind of situation where things are completely out of balance. And we'll be back. Bye-bye.